Today, we're taking on a deep dive into the practical foundations of really our entire global society. We're talking about the monetary system.
And we have a stack of sources here that are, let's say, highly critical. They don't just critique the market economy, they ask a much bigger question.
Right. They're basically asking if this entire structure is even worthy of, governing our lives as we move forward.
It's a really intense conversation because it moves beyond, say, political preference, and it asks this huge structural question. Are the tools we invented to make things easier, money, debt, are they now actually holding human progress back?
So that's our mission today. We are going to thoroughly examine this critique. We'll trace the history of money, try to unpack the alleged mechanics of this perpetual debt cycle.
And we have to look at the statistics on wealth consolidation, which are, frankly, alarming, all leading up to this alternative idea of a resource-based economy.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we have to start at the very beginning. If the system is broken, what exactly is the value of the money we use today, and how on earth did we get here?
Well, to get the modern system, you have to appreciate just how ancient this idea is. Money, as a concept, was introduced, roughly 3,500 years ago in the ancient Babylonian Empire.
It's about all the time.
A very long time. And then you see the first actual coins, the Lydian coins from ancient Anatolia, and those date back to around 700 BC.
And just think about that timeline for a second. We have technology, AI, biotech, instant global communication. It's all growing at this exponential rate.
Yeah.
But the main tool we use for exchange is an invention it's thousands of years old.
And for centuries, this tool has been the engine of everything. It's driven trade, it's financed wars, it's been the source of so much happiness and just immense suffering.
It definitely got us to where we are now, technologically.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It was a catalyst. But the sources we're looking at, they argue that while technology has shot forward, the actual structure of money has stayed stubbornly primitive and, in their view, destructive.
Which brings us to the core critique, I think. What's fascinating here is the whole definition of value.
Yeah.
The source argues that money only has a fictitious value.
Exactly. It's just the abstract worth that we as a society agree to assign to it. It's a consensus, not a physical reality.
That's a huge point. For a long time, though, we did try to anchor that value in something real, didn't we?
We did. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, you had the gold standard. It meant a country's currency was directly tied to the amount of actual physical gold it held in a vault somewhere.
It created this sense of security, right? The idea that every dollar bill was backed by a tiny piece of real limited gold.
But that system is long gone.
Completely gone. By the mid-20th century, and especially when the U.S. decoupled the dollar from gold in 1971, that link was just severed.
Correct. So now we use what's called fiat currency. Fiat just means by decree. It's money that's printed basically out of necessity, and its value is maintained only by a government's declaration and, our collective trust in it.
So the source states, pretty bluntly, that modern money has literally no real value.
Other than the social agreement we all place upon it.
And yet this thing with no real value is what controls our entire global economy. Which brings us to the sharpest part of this critique, the mechanics of debt.
This is where the structural argument really kicks in. The sources point out that central banks, since they started forming back in the 17th century, are often structured as privately held companies.
Sure.
So when they put money into the economy, they do it by loaning that money to the government. And here's the key. They loan it with interest.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because if the money is just created, digitally or printed out of thin air, how can the interest possibly be paid back?
You've hit on the central point.
If the government borrows $100 plus 5% interest, that extra $5 has to come from somewhere, from money that hasn't even been created yet.
Precisely. The authors call this a built-in interest that ensures perpetual indebtedness. The structure itself requires more money to be printed just to cover the interest on the old money.
So we're always running to catch up.
It guarantees it.
That's a powerful claim. But how do the sources support this idea that these private banks are intentionally using this power for their own goals?
Well, the critique alleges that central banks can effectively control politics by financing specific parties or individuals. It even goes so far as to claim they finance geopolitical conflicts, arming one side here and the rebels over there.
all depending on how that instability serves their financial agenda.
Exactly. And on top of that, they can artificially create inflation or deflation. They can wipe out the savings of millions with just a few policy changes to meet these private goals.
And the main consequence of this whole closed-loop system, according to these sources, is this incredible consolidation of wealth and influence.
Unprecedented.
They cite a specific and, frankly, staggering statistic. The ruling elite, or the top 1%, now owns more than 51% of the world's wealth.
Just let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
That tiny fraction of the population is richer than the other 99% of the entire world combined.
So when you look at it through that lens, the system starts to look less like a balanced economy.
And more like what the authors call a pyramid scheme, one that's enabled and protected by laws and governments all over the world.
And the source spends a lot of time asking, what is this 1% even using these immense resources for? If we're producing enough for everyone, why is there so much scarcity?
Right. And the argument is that the resources are used not for broad prosperity, but explicitly to keep this debt-based scheme going.
So this is where they get into the control mechanisms. The critique alleges that the 1% maintains control through active manipulation, things like creating stagnation so real solutions never happen.
Or funding mainstream media to portray the world in this vicious negative light, which spreads, crippling fear and confusion among everyone else.
So the idea is that widespread anxiety actually serves a financial purpose.
Yes. Fear and confusion make it easier to maintain control. It justifies shortages, it justifies these unnecessary inconveniences that keep the average person just focused on surviving day to day.
Instead of looking up and questioning the system itself.
Exactly. They also point to how the arms industry gets so much more funding than healthcare in so many countries. It's another symptom of a system that prioritizes control over well-being.
And even the political landscape is pulled into this. The source claims that political parties offer an illusion of choice.
Different names, different faces.
But in reality, they're allegedly financed by the same private companies, all to pass laws that help their operations, not the average citizen.
The sources present it as this parody of real governance. It's like a performance designed to keep everyone compliant. The ultimate goal, they say, is to turn most people into obedient workers who willingly support this scheme.
Wow. And they connect that directly to the idea of slavery, to an artificially created debt.
They do.
That's intense language.
Yeah.
But it connects to the day-to-day reality for the 99%, doesn't it? If the economy is built on this, let's talk about the human cost.
Yeah.
The people trying to get these pieces of paper that lost their real value long ago.
Well, our lives, as the sources point out, they become completely oriented around this chase from the moment you start school through decades of work.
All the way to retirement.
The focus is almost entirely monetary. Your very existence revolves around this study and work schedule, and you have to comply. If you don't, you face, destitution.
The critique gets really personal here. It argues that money has become like chains, not just for what we do, but for how we think. It turns people into, and these are their words, slaves of greed.
And you can see the moral fallout from that. People sell their homes, their dignity, they compromise their health, their life goals, all for money.
The source also points out that most crime today, theft, fraud, organized crime, even human trafficking, nearly all has a financial motive.
It's driven by a desperation to survive or, just get ahead inside this system.
Which leads to what the source calls this deep absurdity. Right now, stores are filled with food, pharmacies are filled with medicine.
The world is capable of providing for everyone.
But everything requires payment first. You need food, housing, medicine. The resource is right there, but the door is locked until you can pay.
And so all of the really noble pursuits of life, caring for your family, following a passion, making a dream come true, all of that has to take a backseat.
To the grueling task of finding means to realize them.
Yeah. The need to get money just overrides purpose and human connection.
And this is where wealth becomes the ultimate escape hatch. The wealthy are allegedly above social norms, above standards, even above some laws.
Because they can just control the outcome of almost any situation by paying a certain sum. The critique suggests that if you have enough money, almost anything is possible. If you don't, even the basics are a struggle.
The conclusion they draw is pretty stark. The lack of resources most people feel is an illusion. It's a condition created and maintained just to keep the system going, to keep people obedient and preoccupied.
And they don't pull any punches. They call our dependency on this whole value system humiliating and ridiculous. It turns creative activities that should bring us joy into just another burden.
So if the monetary system is the problem, what about solutions? The sources do mention things like universal basic income, UBI,
They do, and they acknowledge it recognizes the problem of survival and scarcity.
but they ultimately reject it.
They reject it because while it provides a safety net, it still keeps the market economy, the whole debt mechanism, completely intact. It doesn't fix the root cause.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is really looking for a complete shift in our entire value system. They're arguing we already have the technology and the ability to cover everyone's basic needs.
The true solution, in their view, is to completely divorce necessity from payment.
And this is where they introduce their true alternative, a scientific way of effectively distributing goods where they are needed without the requirement of payment.
Right. They call it a resource-based economy. The vision is built on this idea that the only real value is in the Earth's resources and our ability to manage them smartly.
It's a world with no banks, no pawn shops, no taxes, no monetary debt.
Because they see all of those things as just artificial processes that slow down what should be happening naturally, which is meeting human needs through smart resource management.
So what does this all mean? The central argument from these sources is that we have become completely dependent on unnecessary pieces of paper.
And that this dependency has created a society that's deeply stratified, unnecessarily cruel, and incredibly wasteful.
The core goal they present is pretty clear then.
It is. The sooner we can shed our messed up value system and just admit that all humans have identical basic needs that deserve to be met, the sooner we can work towards some kind of harmonious coexistence and, real progress.
The source offers a really striking thought experiment to end on. They ask you to imagine a world where every dollar, every coin is replaced by just a single statement.
A piece of paper that says, "We are all humans, we are connected, we all have identical basic needs, and the presence or absence of money isn't going to change that." They claim we have the technology to make that a reality today.
So, if you, listening to this, truly believe that is possible, that we have the means to cover everyone's necessities, this critique raises a profound question for you to consider.
What is the first major societal project we could redirect our vast collective energy towards, beyond just the grueling task of basic survival, if that whole money chase was just eliminated? It's something to mull over as you navigate your own relationship with these necessary yet potentially illusory means of exchange.